the ether, the soul's covering, and how saints hear prayers. A reading of letters 13, 14, and 15 from The Spiritual Life and How to Be Attuned to It by St. Theophan the Recluse. Letter 13, Life According to the Spirit. Subtext: The true happiness of man is life according to the Spirit, the subtle covering of the soul which serves as an intermediary between it and the body, and as a means of communication of souls between themselves and with the world of saints and angels, the radiant and the dark state of the covering of the soul. I wanted to answer the question at the end of the last letter, but your name day was approaching, and I thought I would send you my best wishes on the occasion. I wish you above all good health, because that is the precondition for obtaining every blessing which man considers to be a blessing, and the delight and enjoyment of those blessings. Really, for a sick and feeble person, which pleasures are possible when all the senses are in an abnormal state? An exception should be made only for spiritual comforts. They do not depend in such a way on the state of one's health, and they may be present even in spite of bodily sufferings. Martyrs, while undergoing the very process of martyrdom, truly rejoiced. Actively, and not just with their tongues did they express their rejoicing. What should I wish you next? Usually one is wished happiness at this point. So I too wish you happiness. Just why do we wish this? Indeed, no one to this day has defined what happiness is, or who is truly happy. As I understand it, whoever considers himself to be happy is happy. Therefore, by wishing you happiness, I am also wishing you this. I wish you always to consider yourself to be happy. Why do I wish this? People have so many different conceptions and tastes concerning this that you cannot make anything of it. But I would say to you confidentially that as long as you are not living in the Spirit, do not expect happiness. Intellectual and physical life, when the course is favorable, gives something like happiness, but it is a fleeting illusion of happiness and soon vanishes. Moreover, in their presence is a stormy area formed between soul and body by passionate thoughts, desires, and aroused feelings. It is always powerful. With its presence, by reason of the poison of the passions, the only possibility is intoxication, which forgets suffering, the same as from opium. This forgetfulness of suffering does not come as the result of the absence of passions and sickness of heart. Sickness of heart constitutes an integral part of life in this world. The spirit, however, soars beyond the boundaries of all troubles and carries away the person who abides in the Spirit, and by allowing him to taste its blessings, which are ever present, makes him truly and completely happy. Well then, shall I conclude my well-wishing with this? No, I do not think it is enough. If our life ended with this life, then of course it would be sufficient to say, "Be healthy and happy." As it does not end in this way, but continues even beyond the grave, and there only is the true life to be found, then, for the sake of completeness in my well-wishing, I cannot but wish that you be considered worthy and be blessed there. May you be blessed in that place. With all my heart I wish you this, and diligently pray to the Lord. May He bring you the true life by trouble-free means, and after that establish you in His ever-blessed kingdom. With this, of course, there arise very harsh conditions in your consciousness. There are, of course, crucial conditions, but are they really harsh? I will make a general comment on this for the time being. Yes and no. Judging by how an individual is set from childhood, and judging by that, I would say that for you, they are not very harsh. You are already carrying them out. Just be on your guard, and do not retreat. Another thought has come to me, to send you candy on your name day, but I do not know if I can get any. I will try. In case you have forgotten, at one time I began talking with you about an exceedingly subtle element that is finer than light. It is called ether. Let us suppose that it exists as a matter of fact, and not just in name. I recognize that such a very subtle element exists, and that it penetrates and passes everywhere, serving as the smallest particle of material substance. Along with this, I suppose that within this element soar all the blessed spirits, the angels and divine saints, who are themselves garbed in a kind of raiment made of that very same element. The covering of our soul, understand this word to refer also to the spirit, which is the soul of our human soul, is also made of this very same element. The soul itself is the immaterial spirit, but its covering is made from this ethereal, immaterial element. Our bodies are coarse, but that covering of the soul is very fine and serves as the intermediary between the soul and body. Through it the soul acts on the body and the body on the soul. I am speaking of this only in passing, however. Just keep in mind that the soul has this very fine covering, that our souls have the very same kind of covering as do all spirits. From this it will not be hard for you to conclude that this omnipresent element, very fine, out of which these coverings are made, and in which all spirits soar, is the intermediary for the intermingling of our souls with these spirits. For right now, tear yourself away from this idea and turn your attention to our usual matters. You are presently living in Moscow. You are sitting within the walls of your apartment. You are surrounded by buildings everywhere, and no matter where you turn your eyes, you meet obstructions everywhere. Many things impede your keen vision and far-sighted view. If you were to rise above Moscow in some sort of balloon, however, you would not only see the entire city without impediment, but also its environs. If you were to rise even higher, then you would see even further all around. Sharpen your sight and rise higher and higher. You can see St. Petersburg, Paris, London, etc. All of this is because your vision has become keen, and there are no obstacles to what it sees. Let us return again to the divine saints. The element of which we are speaking is everywhere, and meets no obstacle to itself anywhere. Sunlight passes through glass. While the element can also pass through glass, it also permeates walls, the ground, and everything else. Just as it is able to pass through everything, so are those who soar in it able to pass through everything, when that is necessary, just as the Savior passed through into the room when the apostles were behind a locked door. They occupy a definite space, but when they are enjoined to do so or are permitted, they are immediately transferred to wherever it is necessary by means of the element, and not only do they meet no obstacles, they do not even see them. When necessary, they are transferred, but when it is not necessary, they stay in their own space and see in every direction what is there and what is happening there. When their eyes turn toward earth, that is, toward us sinners, they see us clearly too. Not our coarse bodies, because that is not how they see us. Rather, they see our very souls, as they are. They do not see directly, but by means of the soul's covering, which is like their own, and like the element in which they live, because the state of the soul is accurately reflected by its covering. Imagine, if you will now, that two people are sitting and talking. During this, the soul of each person has its own disposition. Neither one sees what is in the soul of the other on account of the coarse covering of the body, beneath which the soul is concealed. The angels and saints, however, if they were to gaze upon them, would see their souls as they are, and what is within them, because the state they are in, and that which is in them, are reflected in their soul's covering. If within the soul are holy thoughts and feelings, then its covering is bright. With each holy feeling, the brightness has its own character. But if the thoughts and feelings are not quite pure, then the soul's covering is likewise not bright, and each impure feeling has its own characteristic gloom, which is sometimes like fog, at other times like the gloom of night. Suppose you were to rise up to heaven and perceive with angelic vision, after taking on, of course, an angelic body. Then, having turned your gaze upon the earth, you would see among the varied masses of people bright shades, semi-bright, hazy, murky. It would not be at all surprising if those who were brightly dressed seemed gloomy to you, if their souls were bad, while those in tatters would seem bright, if their souls were pure. This is how the heavenly inhabitants see us, and judging by what they see, they rejoice or grieve over us. Allow me to ask you how the saint whose name you bear sees you, especially at present, when she is looking after you more attentively, because you turn to her more fervently. How does your guardian angel see you, and the Lord himself, who sits with a body at the right hand of the Father, but who has promised to be with us also at all times? How they see you is what you are in fact. I am hesitant because I do not want to trouble you and darken your holiday with such a question. On the contrary, I wish to bring you spiritual comfort and joy, for I cannot imagine that you are viewed from heaven as murky or gloomy. You still have not had time to become gloomy, and so you have a bright appearance. My sincere wish to you on your name day is that you always be that way, so that the inhabitants of heaven see you as being bright. Then from this life you will go directly to them. That is what I wish for you with all my heart. Letter 14. The Covering of the Soul. Subtext. The covering of the soul becomes bright or dark corresponding to the inner conditions of the soul. Examples. The demons see a darkened soul. I would like to add some additional comments to the preceding discussion and speak further on the same subject. I will relate to you several experiences showing that the soul in its covering adopts precisely the appearance which corresponds to its inner attitude. During the life of St. Andrew the Fool for Christ, there was a hieromonk who was a faster, a solitary, and a man of prayer. Everyone honored him, that is, they held him in reverence. But when St. Andrew met him, he saw that he was arrayed in some sort of dark fog, and that around his neck was curled a snake with the inscription, Snake of Avarice. Such was the soul that he had. However, no one could see it. The enlightened spiritual eyes of St. Andrew saw. Footnote. St. Andrew spoke with this priest in private, brought him to repentance, and the priest corrected himself. But the eyes of the heavenly inhabitants are even more enlightened. Thus, while we think that no one sees what we are seen by a countless number of eyes. See how many stars there are in the sky. The number of eyes which look upon us is greater still. Indeed, we ourselves are able, if not to see, then to determine what we are. Our conscience, the incorruptible judge, tells us. It may become suppressed with time, but it always manages to free itself from this yoke and raise its voice even in those who are shameless. In those who are innocent, its voice is always pure and like a bell. The conscience is also known as the divine voice of the human spirit. In it is also reflected whatever opinion or view the inhabitants of heaven have of us. Thus, when the conscience says we are pure in everything before God and man, then this testimony of the conscience reflects the light near our soul, and everyone in heaven sees us as bright. If the conscience reproaches us, however, telling us that we are impure, then we appear dark. But the guardian angels are closer to us than anyone, and they know who is dark and who is bright, and are able to judge by the inner attitude whether it is a permanent or temporary condition. Besides the angels and saints, there are dark powers that are invisible to us that also see. However, when the soul is bright, they are unable to look at it, like bats who fear the light. They look at it only when it begins to darken. They run in packs everywhere, and as soon as they notice a darkened soul, they immediately fall upon it and begin to twist it to and fro with thoughts, passionate desires, and disturbance of feelings. The turbulent realm that I described, saying that it lawlessly established itself between the soul and body, is the place where demons sit next to the soul and begin to stir it up, just like dust by wind. They even attempt to creep up to bright souls, but are parried and struck down by rays of light, as if by an arrow. In Antioch, There lived a magician named Cyprian. A youth asked him to use his magic to win for him the favor of Justina, an exemplary Christian, whom he wanted to make his wife, but she would not even look at him. Cyprian sent demons who were in his service to her several times. These demons were supposed to use their particular means to kindle within her love for the youth, but whenever they approached her residence, they were unable to enter it. Turning back, they claimed that they were repulsed and scorched by a light from within. For this Justina was arrayed with light, as if enveloped by some sort of cloud, and they were unable to see her. What better example is there of a soul so bright than when it is Christian, pure in conscience, and devoted to the Lord? When the conscience is pure, the fear of God fills the soul and keeps it inviolable. Then the Lord himself, who is everywhere and fills all things, visits that soul, and it becomes a light and shines like a small star. If it has maintained such purity and brightness, then the soul, upon its departure from the body, crosses over to that light by means of that very same brightness. Once, St. Anthony was conversing with his disciples and spied a band of light that rose up to the heavens. After looking into it and discerning what it was, he said, "It is St. Ammon ascending into heaven with the angels escorting him." So be zealous about this. Do not go to your outer appearance, for it is possible that there is something else visible in us, and that is what we are in reality. Of course, it could be better than what we appear to be. I recall the words of Basil the Great, who says, "The body is ours. Besides this body, what we have, beginning with our clothing, is that which surrounds us. But what are we? We are a soul with a spirit." So, after disengaging oneself from all that is outside of oneself and from the body itself, one must gather oneself and enter within, and examine everything briefly, and decide, just what are you, Matushka, my dearest? This brings us back to the point from which we deviated just a little, that is, to the decision. Just how is one to be in order to live in the spirit, and in spirit the soul and body and all that is exterior to one? We will talk about this another time. Letter 15. How the Saints Hear Our Prayers. Subtext. How the Saints Hear Our Prayers. An additional note concerning prayer. I am very glad you liked what I said about that element. Accept it, imprint it in your mind more firmly, and always keep it in your thought. You will see how it will help you in everything, how many things it explains, and how much comfort it gives. You have probably heard the question as to how the saints hear our prayers, and maybe you yourself have asked the same thing. In answer to this, there are explanations, and there are explanations, but the question still remains a question. In my own opinion, by supposing the existence of an element such as I described, how can the saints not hear our prayers? Do you know how the electric telegraph works? In St. Petersburg, for example, they start up a particular piece of equipment. In the same instant, that action in St. Petersburg is reflected in a similar piece of equipment in Moscow, and the very same motion occurs. Why does it happen like this? Because the equipment is of the same type, and because the wire connecting them is fitted to them. The action of the telegraph is like our prayer. We, along with the saints, are like two pieces of the same kind of equipment, and the medium in which the saints dwell and with which our souls are surrounded, that is the wire. When true prayer, that is, sincere prayer, moves in the soul, then that prayer, by means of the action of the element upon it, flies as if on a beam of light to the saints, and tells them what we want and what we are praying about. There is no gap between the time we make our prayer and when it is heard. The only necessity is that it come from our heart. It is our telegraphic line to heaven. The very same prayers, which are not from our heart, but which come only from our head and tongue, do not produce a ray which rises to heaven, and they are not audible there. Those are not even prayers, but only prayer-like modes. Maybe you have experienced proof of what has been said without even noticing it. You write how you prayed fervently, and that you calmed down immediately after receiving the inner assurance that you would be delivered from what was troubling you, and then in fact this came about. It turns out then that my comparison with the telegraph of heartfelt prayer rising up invisibly to heaven through the element is accurate. From your heart came a bolt or ray to heaven. Along that same path, or along a similar one, there came a ray from heaven in answer to what you needed. That is what always happens with all prayers that come from the heart. The ability to pray in such a manner does not always come about immediately, but the hearing of it does. Do not be smug about what happened. May the Lord grant that it happened for you more often. Remember how you prayed at that moment, and try always to pray like that, from the heart, not just uttering something with a tongue and thinking something with a mind. If you will do it this way, then you will have a working solution for the question of how one is to be in order to live in the Spirit. For such prayer is the life of the Spirit. Here the Spirit dwells in God and unites with Him, and in this is the entire force of its life. Know then that the soul lives only when it prays in such a way as you prayed at that time. When there is no such prayer, it means that the soul has stopped, if it has not become completely deadened. I will not hide from you the fact that even though you were able to pray that way once, you will hardly be able to pray like that all the time. God grants such kind of prayer, or the guardian angel stimulates it. It comes and goes. It does not follow from this, however, that we are permitted to abandon our labor of prayer. Prayer comes to someone who labors at it, but it will not come to anyone who does not work at it. We see that the Holy Fathers labored a great deal at prayer, and by these very labors kindled within themselves a prayerful spirit. That is how they reached this prayerful spirit, the image of which they have left us in their writings. Everything said by them on this subject comprises a science of prayer, which is the science of sciences. The time is coming when we will go over it, but for now I have touched upon it only in passing. I would also add that there is nothing more important than prayer. Therefore, it is necessary to labor in it most diligently and more than anything else. May the Lord grant you diligence in such labor. Your humble thoughts and feelings about yourself are angelic feelings. How perfect and light are the angels! But they are all humble, more humble than any person. A humble soul is always bright. The darkening of the soul begins when it begins to think about itself a lot, for such a thing is of the dark forces. May God grant that you never lose such feelings, so that you always be in the light. Once again, we have strayed from our question. Just be patient a little longer.